Good morning. We're going to call to order the joint meeting of the Facilities and Budget Committees. I want to welcome you here this morning and thank you all for starting out bright and early with us. We have several items on our agenda that we're going to handle as expeditiously as possible. And for those of you who are following along with us, at this point we're going to skip down to item number 4. I'm going to ask Chris Kinsley if he would come to the podium, please.
Yeah. Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning.
The first item up for action is item number 4A. This is a resolution of the Board of Governors requesting the Division of Bond Finance, State Board of Administration of Florida to issue revenue bonds on behalf of Florida Atlantic University. This will finance construction of an apartment-style residence hall on the main campus of Florida Atlantic University. The staff of the Board of Governors, Division of Bond Finance, have reviewed this resolution and request from the University Board of Trustees. We find it substantially in compliance with the Board of Governors debt guidelines, and we would recommend approval of this item. And members of the university representatives are here to answer and address any questions, as well as myself.
Any questions for Chris or from the folks from Florida Atlantic University?
Madam Chair, I move approval.
It's been moved and properly second that we approve this item. Are you ready for a vote? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Great. Move to the next item, Chris.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda, 4B, is a resolution of the Board of Governors authorizing issuance by Florida Gulf Coast University Financing Corporation of tax-exempt bonds to finance the construction of a student residence facility on main campus of Florida Gulf University. And again, Florida Division of Bond Finance, staff of the Board of Governors have reviewed this request from the Board of Trustees of Gulf Coast University. We found it substantially in compliance with the Board of Governors debt guidelines and would recommend approval of this resolution.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion approved. Chris, can you move on now to item number 5, please, which is to amend the 0809 fixed capital outlay legislative budget request.
Yes, ma'am. Item 5, if you would turn in your packet or want to follow in the packet, starts on page 54 of the Facilities and Budget agenda. The first section of this is on page 56. This is a request to adjust our previously approved in January 3-year PICO list. The University Boards of Trustees of West Florida and Florida A&M University have requested a change within their currently approved allocation. First is for West Florida, shifts funds from the College Natatorium renovation to College of Business Education Center, and for FAMU it switches $2 million from Utilities Infrastructure to Pharmacy Phase 2.
Any questions on this item, on these items?
Second.
I guess what we're going to do is we're going to wait and take a motion on both. If you could just hold off 1 second, because Chris, you're going to talk about the Capital Improvement Trust Fund?
Yes, ma'am. I'll be getting to that next. We have an item on page 57. This is legislative approval to issue debt. We're adding, for this on page 57, we're adding the East Campus office building for the University of Florida. This is necessary legislative approval. This is not formal debt approval by the board. They have not yet come forward with this. Is just adding to this list. If I may move to the next item, the CITF that you requested.
Yes, thank you.
In January, the Board of Governors approved a CITF request of $160 million. Based on this approved allocation of the $160 million, each university developed a list of student-funded facility projects. And this list you can find on page 59 and 60 of your agenda. Each recommended project has been developed by the university in consultation with the Student Government Association of the university. And these cover a wide range of student needs, including such areas as health and wellness centers, career service centers, and athletic fields. It also includes renovations and upgrades to some existing student-funded facilities. All project costs are paid for solely with student fees, and they're generated from a $4.76 per credit hour charge. This fee has not been increased since 1988. The recommendation from staff is that we amend the 2008-09 LBR to specifically designate the $160 million. The board currently has $27 million reserved for these projects. The remaining amount is coming from sale of CITF bonds and future fee collections. The bond issue itself must be authorized and approved at a future Board of Governors meeting. While the financial market conditions are uncertain and will affect the amount of bond proceeds available, we believe $160 million is a very conservative estimate for these projects. We have one technical change requested by University of South Florida. On page 59, they've requested that we delete the University of South Florida Health Student Wellness and Study Lounge and redirect that amount to its Student Wellness and Nutrition Center. So that is a change from what's in your packet. And I'd be happy to address any questions about the CITF request.
Well, I'd like to, first, are there any specific questions about CITF at this time? As you all are aware, this was really brought to our attention based upon the urging of our student member, Ryan Mosley. Unfortunately, Ryan was not able to be with us this morning, but he did provide some comments that I would like to read into the record on his behalf. He indicates that he wants to I want to express our sincere appreciation for everyone's support of the Capital Improvement Trust Fund projects. These projects have all received student input. In the case of the University of Florida, a committee composed of 50% of students and 50% faculty and administration review proposals and advance recommendations that the board now has the opportunity to approve. I urge the Board of Governors to approve these recommendations as these projects are vital to student life. Thanks again for your continuous support. So I wanted to be sure to put that in the record on behalf of Governor Mosley in his absence. Are there any further questions regarding any of the items that were addressed by Chris relating to the changes to the 08-09 fixed capital outlay legislative budget request?
Madam Chair, I move approval of all items.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Great. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank
I think
you.
at this time, I'm going to turn the gavel over to Governor Perez, who is going to take care of the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Governor Parker. First thing we have in our packet, the Budget Committee meetings from January 24, 2008. Those minutes, hopefully everyone's had a chance to review them. Is there a motion to amend anything, delete anything, or adopt the minutes as presented? Motion to adopt the minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. And opposed, motion carries. Minutes are approved. Let's call on Tim Jones to join us at the podium and talk about the 2009-2010 legislative LBR guidelines. Tim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 62 of your packet are the draft 2009-2010 LBR guidelines. These are the guidelines you approve annually in preparation for the budget meeting that we'll be having in August. We've included a strike-through and underlined version so you can easily see the changes. We do have a couple changes this morning we need to make. If you look on page 62 of your packet, I'll walk you through those changes, and they have to do with the compacts. Originally, we had planned on having those done and approved by the board in June, but in light of the budget situation and the focus of our universities on dealing with reduced funds, compacts are being pushed back to later in the fall, probably in the November time frame. So on page 62 in the second paragraph, we would like to delete the underlined words that says as outlined in university compacts with the BOG. And then on page 65 of your packet, there at the top where it provides a timeline of March, April, June, where it says June, Board of Governors approves university compacts. We'd like to change that to November. And then on page 67, behind the facilities section of the guidelines, where it talks about board approving the compacts in June, that would change to November also. And those are the only technical changes to the guidelines this morning.
Thank you, Tim. Are there any questions to Tim with regard to the guidelines? I know we were all fully briefed on some of the changes. Okay, seeing none, is there a motion to approve the 2009-2010 guidelines as amended by Tim's comments? Governor Chase moves. Is there a second? Second, Governor Parker. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. And opposed, motion carries. Tim, you want to continue with auxiliary facilities?
Yes, sir. The next issue deals with auxiliary facilities that have bond covenants that require operating budget approval. This information starts on page 68 of your packet. Specific bond covenants issued by the Division of Bond Finance require the approval of operating budgets for the upcoming 2008-2009 fiscal year at least 90 days preceding the beginning of the year. Staff has reviewed the income and expenditure statements submitted by the universities and found that there will be sufficient revenue to cover operating expenditures and debt service obligations for 2008-2009. And we seek your approval.
Thank you, Tim. Staff has reviewed all these presentations from the universities?
Yes. Yes, sir.
In light of any changes that may occur in the economy?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Jones in this regard? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the auxiliary facilities and bond covenants? A motion with a second. Any additional discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. And opposed. Motion carries. Before we move on, yesterday at the Securities Task Force meeting, specific recommendations were made to the Student Affairs Committee with regard to some amendments to the LBR and to the budgetary process. They came out of the Student Affairs Committee to be dealt with in our Budget Committee this meeting. I'm going to read the proposed motion to modify the LBR in the following ways, and I will once again give the caveat I gave yesterday, which is the task force was formed at the request of the governor and our chairman for purposes of putting forth the needs of the system with regard to security. And we will, if we approve these motions today, amend our LBR with that regard. We are keenly aware of the budget circumstances. We understand that we're asking for approximately $18 million additional dollars, or at least we're stating the need for approximately $18 million additional dollars. And we're doing this in response to the request and the charge by the governor to advise the governor and the legislature of what is needed in order to make this state university system as safe as possible. We'll be asking the universities to do with what they can, with existing funds and with whatever funds the legislature is able to allocate to them in this regard. But it's our task to put forth the plan as best as possible so that now and through the next several years we may be able to fund fully the needs that we have as a system. So with your indulgence, I will read into the record the motion coming from the Student Affairs Committee yesterday. The motion is to accept the recommendations from the Academic and Student Affairs Committee on the funding of the following issues from the Emergency Preparedness and Campus Safety Task Force. Number one, $13.8 million for enhancement of notification systems at each university, and the reference is Table 7.1 of the committee report yesterday. Number two, $600,000 for 100% FTE managers at 6 universities, which currently do not have dedicated positions. Number three, $3.08 million of funding for 61 additional police officer positions to move closer to achieving the national standard for community policing of 1 to 500, as advanced by the International Association of Chiefs of Police. This funding is to achieve 1 to 600 standard of the SUS Chiefs of Police offered in view of the current budget situation. And number four, $560,000 for training in tactical equipment, inclusive of enhanced body armor, bullet-resistant helmets, rifles, and accessories, to improve the response of university police in the event of an active shooter. The total request, the total LBR amendment, would be an addition of $18,040,000. And I'll ask for a second to my motion, and then we can discuss. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded. Is there any discussion on this amendment to the LBR? Again, understanding the budget situation that we are in, however, the importance of making certain that these needs are well known. Governor Stavros.
Understanding the lack of funds, I think our investigation, our discussion in reference to safety of our universities, we should say this must be done. Forgetting the lack of funds, it must be done, and somehow the universities and the legislature's got to find this $18 million to safeguard our students and faculty and people on our campuses. I think we should have a very strong presentation on this, Governor Perez.
Thank you, Governor. And I know that the Chancellor has made a presentation to a Senate committee or House committee? A Senate committee with regard to this issue and these recommendations already, Governor, and we are certainly pushing through as hard as we can on these issues. And by adopting this into our LBR, I think we're making the statement that even in light of a difficult year, we think these elements are important. We're putting everyone on notice as to what we think the standards need to be as a system, and we will encourage our universities to do what they can do, particularly if the legislature is unable to meet these needs and take steps towards getting to these levels of support. Governor Parker.
I would just like to note, after having had the pleasure of serving as a part of the Security Task Force under Governor Perez's leadership, is that I know that right now he's just bringing to the body the dollar values associated with some of the recommendations, but several of the recommendations did not involve necessarily an increase in our LBR. And what I'd ask is that we just urge universities to go ahead and put into place those recommendations that don't have any financial impact. A lot of folks put a lot of time into studying these issues. I know particularly with the chiefs of police that I worked with, there are some items that they have in there that don't have any fiscal impact. I'd ask if you would, as the presidents and the board chairs, just be particularly sensitive to those items we can go ahead and implement now that don't have any impact on the budget.
Thank you, Governor Parker. And those were recommendations adopted by the Student Affairs Committee yesterday, and hopefully they will. And I will be making an additional motion in the full board meeting with regard to some regulations that I'd like the board to consider in light of some of the other commentary that came up yesterday. Any further discussion on the motion to amend the LBR as stated? Seeing none, I will call the question. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed. Motion carries. Thank you very much. We are going to ask President Kavanaugh to delay a month or two until our next board meeting to give us his presentation on appropriate and predictable funding, and move now into agenda item 9, which is Dr. Johnson with regard to our enrollment plan update. Nate?
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chair. I have a presentation on this that I would be happy to give, or if you'd like, I can just move to the bottom line and request approval of the amended plan.
Actually, if you could give us an abbreviated presentation, that would be great.
All right. In your paper handout on this plan, the main bullets on the enrollment are on page 2. In summary, the population projections for Florida have been revised downward over the last 18 months, and the current projections are about 4% lower for 2012 than they were 18 months ago. We expect demand for SUS enrollment to roughly parallel that, so we would expect about 4% less demand for university education than we would have expected 18 months ago before these projections had been revised. That equals about a 1% annual growth rate for the foreseeable future if we were simply to grow at the rate of population growth in the populations that feed the university system. The main constraint, and this is really what the amended enrollment plan is about, the main constraint is really the capacity of the system, not the student demand for the system. And given the funding picture that we're facing, we are not anticipating for 08-09 that there will be funds available for growth in the university system, and the focus is really going to have to be on protecting the base as much as we can and serving the students that we already have. Recognizing that, our universities have also asked for some flexibility in how they manage their enrollment down to their new funded levels over the next few years. And we're recommending that we give them that flexibility at the same time as we recognize that we will not be able to request growth funds from the legislature. So the motion that we're requesting, or the action that we're requesting, is approval of the amended university system enrollment plan on pages 88 to 90 of the board packet. And that is a no-growth plan for 2008-2009. We will return to the issue and hope that we will be able to return to a pattern of sustainable growth in the midterm at least.
Great. Thank you, Nate. For purposes of discussion, excuse me, is there a motion to adopt the amended state university system enrollment plan as contained in the packet? Got a motion? Is there a second? There is a second. Let's open the floor on discussion. What we are proposing here is an enrollment plan, as Nate said, which would indicate no growth over the next year-long period, at least until we get a sense more of where the funding is going to be, where the mechanisms are going to be. It will not affect, obviously, in fact, it will maintain our relationship with the community colleges. Our 2+2s will continue to be accepted at our state universities. There will be no impact, nor is there a desire to impact that relationship or that system. We think that it's an important and imperative system. It may have some impact, depending upon those numbers, on freshman enrollment. If the 2+2 numbers continue to go up, which hopefully they will, it will impact freshman enrollment until such time as we can increase our numbers. Are there any comments with regard? Governor Duncan.
Is this clear enough that it is not our intent to affect the 2+2 here in this current year in this document, in your mind? Because I think that is a very important message that we need to be sending. You know, is there a way to just make that beyond our comments and someone looking at our minutes that was the intent with this?
I think so. I mean, unless we make a specific statement to that regard, but I think we've been fairly clear as a body that the 2+2 should not be an issue or ever be on the table. So, I mean, I think we're okay with this language, but I'd be happy to take suggestions if, as we discuss, some come to mind. Governor Chasten.
I have an issue with some of this over the fact that the universities are already taking a budget hit from the legislature, and then we're going to do a self-imposed budget hit from the extra funds that are coming in from the unfunded enrollment. And I just think that puts a lot of stress on our universities because you're actually taking more money away from them voluntarily that already exists in the system. And I really think it should be up to the university to look at this, and maybe we need to rethink this after the current legislative session rather than passing this at this point in time.
All right. Thank you, Governor. Commissioner. You are on, sir.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Smith. I appreciate your comments about the 2+2, and just would add to Ann's comments about needing us to be clear that again our relationship is a very positive one, and look forward to continue that. The numbers will increase. That's my promise. The numbers are going to become a problem.
Well, that would be a good problem for us to have.
But that's the right problem to have. But again, I thank you for your comments this morning, and any move to make sure that's clear to the legislature would be great. Thank you.
Governor Parker?
I need to, I have two questions. I guess one is I'd like to refer you to slide number 8, and if you could go into that a little bit, that just kind of discuss the impact that this is going to have on, I guess, on certain sectors of our community. So if you could elaborate on that. And the second question I have is as it relates to something that Governor Chase indicated as far as timing, because his question suggested that, is there any flexibility with timing of what we're doing?
Yes, thank you, Governor Parker. I'll address Governor Chase's comment first. I believe that the recommendation here actually does give the flexibility that Governor Chase was asking for. Yeah. We're not asking the universities to reduce their enrollments immediately. The analogy that I'm going to borrow from one of our university provosts yesterday is that the tuition and state appropriations are like the two engines of a twin-engine plane, and when you lose one, the other one just takes you to the site of the crash. So the intent would be to recognize that they can't run on one engine alone, but they do need the flexibility to decide where that where and how long that last engine can take them. So we hope that the other engine will come back online in the next few years, but, if that doesn't happen, they need to have the flexibility to enroll the students that they can reasonably enroll and collect the tuition revenue from those students.
And that is particularly in light of slide 8 the Governor Parker is raising, so hopefully
Yes. And as far as on slide 8, the intent of that, and I in a longer presentation, I had hoped to get into this a little bit, but if we were just to grow at the rate of population growth and assume that would roughly parallel what kind of demand there is for the university system, if you look at the rates of participation of minority groups in the state university system, and the fact that those groups are tending to grow to be a larger part of the state population over the next several years, there could be an issue with a lower level of demand for the system unless something happens to increase those participation rates, improvements in the K-14 pipeline, and there is some reason for concern that could be a constraint on demand in the system. The other piece of that, though, is that that is not a problem that is always fixed in time. And in fact, if we went back to 1990, and if we assumed that the participation rates of those age groups and minority groups at that time would remain constant through 2007, we would have dramatically underprojected what our current enrollment is, because in fact the participation rates have increased over the last 20 years. We would hope that would continue over the next 5 to 20 years, but it is certainly a reason for concern and something to pay attention to. Either way, however, whether we're projecting based on the participation of groups by age or by race, ethnicity, the capacity is really the limiting constraint here. It's not student demand, even with the lowered expectations for population. So that's the problem we're facing right now, is whether we can build the capacity to meet the demand. Thank you, Nate. President Hitt.
I just wondered what thought has been given to potential impact from the proposed creation of four-year institutions out of two-year institutions, and what that may do to our 2+2 patterns. We at this point, I guess UCF enrolls more AA transfers than any other campus in the system, and we've got compacts that guarantee admission to our programs for 4 community colleges. But as more and more community colleges seem to be looking to offer 4-year degrees, how do we even anticipate what that may look like, not knowing what their aspirations are?
I think that's a fair point, Mr. President. And Nate, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get a presentation, at least on some wild guesses, if nothing else, on what that will mean as this continues. But for projection purposes and for planning purposes, we've got to try to get some arms around that issue. There's no doubt if we continue with the 4-year programs, or if the state college system ultimately develops, it may substantially affect the metrics that we're using now on our projections and on our planning. Chancellor?
In response to President Hitt's question and Commissioner Smith's comments, we are working more closely than ever with the community college system on a whole range of shared challenges and shared responsibilities. And we've begun some better conversations than we've ever had on that particular matter that you've raised, Dr. Hitt. It's early. This development is relatively, recent, as you know, and we're going to be taking a close look at that right after the session. As it relates to community college, AA and AS transfers, we are studying that very closely. We're very pleased that Governor Christ in his budget did acknowledge the importance of that and found resources for that. And we're hopeful that the House and the Senate will find those resources. We had a very good discussion yesterday with the chief academic officers of each of our institutions. They understand the importance of AA and AS transfers. We're going to find a way to continue to make it happen. And then right after the session, we will come back to the board with a more formal discussion about that issue and perhaps provide, after consultation with the universities and the commissioner and the community college system, some even better and sharper guidelines about how we can continue to facilitate the flow of AA and AS transfers into the public university system.
Thank you, Chancellor. Is there any further discussion on the enrollment plan as proposed, Governor Parker?
I have a question, and I'd like to, practically speaking, I guess I kind of want to know what this means as much as we can predict that. And I guess, and certainly, I understand and appreciate that we have a responsibility to the students who we've currently enrolled to ensure that their quality is not impacted by our continued acceptance of unfunded growth. So I have a wonderful appreciation for that. I also have a real concern about those that we're going to be turning away. And I just want to, I guess, ask Dr. Hitt and Dr. Kavanaugh, and I'm sure it'll be very different for you guys, is that, what does that actually mean? I mean, does that mean that we'll have thousands of students that we'll have to send rejection letters to? I mean, practically speaking, what does that really mean for us to adopt what I think is needed because our funds are so low, but I just want to understand practically, on campus.
Well, I'm sure these patterns differ by campus, but if
Right.
you look just at the three institutions that seem to have the top demand, and as I understand that, that's Florida, Florida State, and UCF. And it may the same pattern may exist at West Florida and others, but if you look, we get about 28,000 applications a year. We accept about half of those students, and about half of those show up. That's true at Florida, I'm sure. I think it's also true at Florida State. Maybe true elsewhere. So we're already sending rejection letters to 14,000 students. The question, I guess, would be, do we send another 500 or 1,000 rejection letters? Where do those students go? I mean, the more rejection letters we all send, the less likely it is there, when the music stops and you have to find a chair, the less likely everybody finds a chair. But I have worried a little bit all along about the notion that somehow, as we reject more students, the reality of constrained capacity is going to suddenly sink in because we're already sending out 14,000 rejection letters at each of three institutions. Will another 1,000 be all that noticeable in the big mix of things? And I just don't have the answer to that. But that's where we are, is we'll probably all be sending out another 500,000, maybe more rejection letters. But it's in a pool of tens of thousands already.
I think that I agree with what John said. With the numbers of rejection letters that are already going out, what's the tipping point that it takes to get people's attention on that side? But there's also a couple of other levels of complication. One that we have raised before is that if we flatline enrollment, that puts additional incentive for community colleges to offer baccalaureate programs, for number one. And number two, on the 2+2 side, it also means that we in many cases are simply deferring admission from freshman to junior year. Because if those students go to a community college because we've rejected them at the level of freshman, complete an AA degree, they can always transfer back. So what we've done is we've shifted the enrollment pressure from freshman year to junior year. And at that point, with the 2+2 agreements, then you get caught in this negative downward spiral that the board discussed earlier. That if we do nothing and I don't believe we should do anything to the 2+2 agreements, that puts additional pressure to drop freshmen, which exacerbates the problem on the 2+2 side. So somewhere along the line, we have to figure out a way out of this without giving. President Hitt has been vocal on this issue before, giving continued incentive for community colleges to continue developing baccalaureate programs because we're not taking the students. And at the same time, increasing the pressure of junior year on the 2+2 transfer issue, exacerbating the freshman problem. We've got to get out of that cycle.
Thank you, Mr. President. What I'm going to do is ask from the Budget Committee, I'm going to ask Governor McDevitt's committee, Student Affairs, if she could maybe work with staff to get a little more information around this at a later meeting so we can kind of get arms around it. But for this budget cycle for this year, I think we should take a hard look at what we've got proposed and move along. Governor Duncan?
Stand correctly, with the words we have on this paper and this enrollment plan that we are adopting, does it negatively impact the decisions you guys are going to be making at your campuses before we come back with that additional insider information?
I don't believe it does. What we've done is ask them to stay where they are, not to reduce in any way, shape, or form. And I'm not certain there's capacity to go larger than you are at this point in time. But
I just wanted to make, that was how I interpreted it. I just wanted to make sure that was, because it is a complicated issue, that was the correct assumption.
That's a clear intent. We're saying no more freshmen than we took in last year, but we're trying to keep at least our 4 consortium schools right on track the way we have been. President Manchin and I were just comparing notes. The thing we're both worried about is that as more are rejected, our yield may go up. So predicting that how many students are going to come out of that pool we send acceptances to gets harder.
Okay.
So we could have the unanticipated consequence here of turning more students down and having more of those whom we accept our acceptance, if you will. You know, it's like you send invitations to a party. You really don't know who's going, even if you have RSVP, you don't know how many are going to be there to the whole party. So if more show up in the fall than our formulas predict, we still could have more freshmen. And as President Weatherall has pointed out on several occasions, we're all working like the dickens to meet the goal set by the Board of Governors, the legislature, and everyone else to raise retention rates. That produces more enrollment as well. So it's getting harder and harder as circumstances change to reliably predict the results of our admissions and retention efforts.
So, I'm sorry, just I want to make sure I understand it because it is a complex. I mean, I know there's no easy solution. So, if you do what you do now and you base it on your best guess of assumptions of acceptances, and then more show up and stay than we accepted, are we budget-wise punishing them then because they've got more people than they thought? I mean, I think that is long-term. Is that?
That's. But then there has to be some adjustment to a plan. I think we all understand. Where we get nervous is where the timeline gets so short that we can't adapt to changing circumstances. There was discussion earlier about putting it up, saying, all right, this year we're going to change everything. Well, that's pretty hard for us to predict that precisely. To steer to a goal of change in 1 year, that month.
Right. Where we are at this point is announcing a policy for this year, which my understanding is will not have a negative impact, will not impact negatively on the 2+2s, but we'll send the message that says we understand our budget constraints. Excuse me. So any further discussion? Seeing that, I'll call the question on the enrollment plan. All in favor of the modified enrollment plan for this year, please say aye. And opposed? Aye. Motion carries. We turn the gavel back over to Governor Parker. That will close our budget hearing.
I think we're at a point of just having closing remarks. I just would like to thank the staff and thank the members of the Board of Governors and particularly the Facilities Committee for being so attentive and just dealing with the needs that we have. Unfortunately, this has been a different time for us. Once was a time when we always knew that our numbers would go up and we have additional PICO dollars to allocate. Certainly a sign of the times within the state right now that we are dealing with numbers that are staying the same or possibly going lower. So I just want to thank the staff and thank universities for working with what we have available, making the best use of the dollars that have been allocated to us. And that's all that I have, Governor Perez.
And as we wrap up the Budget Committee, I want to first acknowledge the legislature came out with their budget proposals, the House and the Senate, both of whom we must acknowledge made a substantial commitment to higher ed. They weren't as bad as we thought they would be, and the legislature showing a strong willingness to fund our cause, fund our mission, and although we have disagreements in some areas back and forth, certainly they and we are moving with the same passion towards making certain that our students are educated, and hopefully we'll get past our disagreements and find a way to continue to work together for the good of the system. Some of the changes we made today are tough. Look, capping enrollment is a very difficult thing to do. It's a difficult message to send to our students, but unfortunately the realities are that's where we are. So that was an important decision to make today, and I'm thrilled that we made it. I'm also thrilled that we put forth the new amendment to the LBR with regard to our budget on security and our safety reforms. Those are essential. As Governor Stavros has pointed out, they are imperative, and hopefully we'll get some attention in those matters as well. Madam Chair, I'll move for adjournment.
I concur with that motion, and I think the Facilities Joint Committee meeting of the Facilities and Budget Committees are now adjourned. Is adjourned. Is adjourned, yes.
Thank you. We'll call the meeting of the Board of Governors. Please. Mikey, will you call the roll?
Here. Dr. Tate? Mr. Edwards? Dr. Marshall? Here. Mr. Martin? Mr. Rose is not able to be here. Ms. Pappas? Ms. Parker?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Commissioner Smith? Here. Thank you. Mr. Stavros? Here. Mr. Temple? Dr. Zachariah? He was on the line, Madam Chair. Ms. McDevitt is here. Madam Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning. First, I'd like to extend a thanks to President Weatherall for his gracious hospitality to his Board of Trustees. Thank you very much. It's a beautiful facility. Provost Abel, thank you. With the budget cuts, we appreciate your hospitality and will likely invite ourselves back. Thank you very much. We are in the midst of a difficult legislative session. Is that the understatement of the year? Because of the serious budget cuts and continuing discussions of reorganizing the governance of education again in Florida, it's needless to say it's disappointing to me personally and to our board that we continue to have these discussions. Our state university system brings value to the citizens of this state. Our universities graduate thousands of students each spring, and they will be doing that again in the next few weeks. Our universities are economic engines. We bring millions of dollars in research funds to our state. We generate new businesses from this research. In reality, we are part of the system. Our system is what can improve the economic situation in Florida. I want to thank the 2.8 million voters who put the Board of Governors in place. We held our first meeting in January '03. I don't believe they've changed their mind. These were thoughtful people who cared about our university system, who cared about our state. I just don't believe they've changed their mind. It's amazing how many people I hear from every week, usually daily, who are really paying attention to this conversation. I'm always very impressed that they're reading, thinking, and do care about our university system. They understand how important you are and what you presidents are doing to protect our state, to make it better. Yesterday morning, and Vice Chairman McDevitt and I were in the gallery. The Senate heard the bill that they're on the resolution that would send to the voters a measure again which would create yet another governing board for higher education. This morning they will have the final vote on that bill. Let it be clear that the Board of Governors will not continue as we sit today. The name will continue, and I think that was a pretty good plan on their part. As they say, the Board of Governors will continue. This board will not continue. It will not be a constitutional board. We will lose our independence and our constitutional status to operate, regulate, and control, and to be fully responsible for the management of the whole university system. Make no mistake, this is not going back to the Board of Regents of before. The Board of Regents was indeed a statutory body, a creation of the legislature, but it had lump sum authority over funds. It hired and fired university presidents. It had collective bargaining responsibilities for all faculty and other unionized staff. It approved all bachelor's through graduate and professional and any university degree programs, and it completely managed all university construction projects. And the Board of Regents, just 7 years ago, angered the legislature with some of its decisions, so it was abolished, swept away. If the Senate prevails, the governance system of the day could be once again changed at the will of the legislature. If you, in your great leadership as presidents, provosts, faculty, who do such wonderful work, and though many of us on a volunteer board have given many years, I for one have been doing it a long time, if you in some way anger the legislature of that moment, the governance system once again can be changed. The university system is not a plaything to be brushed away because of its decisions. It's not healthy when opponents cannot agree to disagree, that we cannot respect one another's opinions. Those of you in leadership in this room are very valuable to this state. You should be able to give your opinions, to have thoughtful conversation, and that those thoughts be respected. If we lose an effective system-wide board, we lose the ability to make thoughtful system-wide decisions. We lose the ability to shape a vision for the university system and to implement any long-term strategies, whether for enrollment, planning, as we discussed today, or for wise expenditure of resources. As we all discussed today, we know articulation is the one thing that this state has done better, in my opinion, than any other state. I believe many people in this country agree. Is that at risk? I don't know. It certainly is not at risk for this board because we recognize the value of it, as in our discussion this morning. The resulting process, where the legislature makes all the decisions, encourages all the universities to fight one against the other for needed funds from the legislature. Let the weak beware. Let the one that is not in the political favor of the moment beware. It could move very quickly, and we've all seen it. The proposed amendment also affects the university boards. Trustees also need to be mindful. This does not leave them in the position they sit today. No, their authority is also subject to the legislature. And yes, the legislature may enact a law today that protects them in a specific way. But I fear what happened if their president should have a controversial speaker. A speaker that maybe did not agree with the legislature as it sits today. That might be unpopular. In my opinion, this is not the way our university should be managed. Generally, the members of this board and I have been treated very respectfully and cordially by the legislature. As all of you know, I've spent many years dealing with the legislature, and I consider them my friends. I consider them my friends today. I'm not sure they consider me their friend, but I consider them their friends. Yesterday, as I sat in the gallery, a senator stood up and said, this board, now look at this board, have you ever seen more thoughtful volunteers on any board? I haven't. Said this board was unmanageable and unaccountable. I have never seen a board, and though I may be a little prejudiced, that has been more generous with their time, thoughtful in decisions in this board, and I am so respectful of all of you and of our presidents, of our boards of trustees, thoughtful people who are giving their time to make our system better. I want to tell you today, I believe that we are the most manageable, accountable entity in our state. I don't know of entity more than a university. I don't know any entity that's more accountable than our universities. As it seems to me, we're accountable to everybody, and we should be accountable. We have many issues in this state. As a business owner and a realtor in Florida, believe me, I am well aware of the issues in our economy. I know the legislature and the governor have such difficult decisions to make and such choices, and I thank them both for the budget. Both the House and the Senate, I think, are being thoughtful and careful with our university system, and I thank them for that. But I hope they'll remember that in important, tough times that we are part of the solution. We're in the business of educating citizens to become productive parts of the workplace, to provide jobs, to help our economy move out of this rather difficult time. Educated citizens create jobs and opportunities. I just believe that we are the crown of the state. And I hope that all of you will continue your great work and know that I respect you and thank you for your work. I'm also respectful of the legislature and intend to continue to treat them in that way, and I ask for that respect in return. Thank you very much. We will have the approval of the board minutes, and then I'll ask the chancellor. Has everyone had an opportunity to review all the minutes as included in our agenda? And if so, a motion to approve? Second. All in favor?
Right.
Thank you. The chancellor?
Members of the board, Madam Chair, good morning. I will give just a few comments. In just a few weeks, we will graduate thousands of students in our April commencements. This year, we project that we will have graduated 67,000 students, up from 52,000 students in 2002, and a 4% increase from last year. So thank you to our faculty and to our universities for moving ahead and staying on point. Our students do continue to help make this a better world. Among our students are 4,000 veterans, many of them who've done tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan. We want to salute our veterans and tell them how proud we are of them. And there's another group of students, Madam Chair, that I want to talk about this morning. They're at the University of Central Florida. They're enrolled in a business course called Cornerstone. As part of this course, students volunteer for a semester with area nonprofits and philanthropic government agencies. And just this past month, these students were responsible for raising enough money for a Maitland-based foundation called New Hope for Kids to send a high school senior with spina bifida to Washington and to fulfill his life dream to meet President Bush and to be with former Speaker Tom Feeney. The energy and commitment of our students gives us hope for the next generation of Floridians. Thanks to UCF's Business School for helping our students to do the right thing. There's also one more piece of good news among much that I could share with you concerning our students. I want to congratulate a UCF student, Lalita Deanne Booth, who just received notification of winning a prestigious Truman Scholarship. I think it's the only Truman this year for a student enrolled in the state university system. I know that many of our universities make heroic efforts to put forth other meritorious students. Ms. Booth is currently enrolled in a dual degree program in finance and accounting and is the founder and director of a nonprofit financial literacy initiative in her community. Governor Christ recently appointed or reappointed many new members to our university's boards of trustees. And we need to thank Governor Christ, and as well the Senate, I believe, recently ratified all of the nominees for board trusteeships. I think that was yesterday. So we're very pleased with that, Madam Chair. We also, as you have, we want to thank the legislature for its very serious consideration of our budget challenges. We're hopeful that the House, the Senate, and the Governor can agree on a level of funding that preserves both quality and access for Florida students. We're not out of the woods. There are very serious issues that our universities are attempting to manage with the continuing cutbacks, but we're very grateful to the House and the Senate for hearing our message and for working as diligently and hard as they could to find the resources that they have. As we grapple with budget cuts, I want to review for the board the range of efficiencies that have been taken in our universities during the past few years. Over the last 6 years, we've reduced expenditure per FTE by 13%, and we're still graduating more students, Madam Chair. We've cut university support by 6%. We've reduced administrative expenditures by 13%. We've reduced library expenditures by 26%. We've reduced library advising expenditures by 32%. Yet we continue as a system to graduate more students every year, and we've maintained our system-wide graduation rate at over 63%, which is higher than most systems. So I think it shows that we have a very responsive university system, very responsive leadership in our presidents who are focused with their faculty on getting their students in and getting them out. Board members should also know that our relationship with community colleges is stronger than ever. The number of community college AA graduates admitted annually to our 11 universities has grown from 16,000 in 2003 to more than 20,000 in 2007-08. During the same period, the number of Florida Community College associate degree transfers as a percentage of all undergraduate admissions has increased from 31 to 38%. My point is that our partnership with the community colleges has never been stronger, has never been better. It's alive and well, and we want to keep it that way. I do want to thank the Florida Council of 100 and the Florida Chamber for their support during the past couple of weeks. Despite some short-term challenges, I remain very optimistic about our system and state for two reasons. First, there is growing recognition in the House and Senate that higher education and a strong university system are keys to the state's economic development. Second, we find a very strong support for the university system within the business community. The business community understands that it has to have a strong and robust system to respond to the broader challenges of economic development. Finally, special thanks to our Board of Governors staff and to the professional staffs at our state universities throughout Florida. Through thick and thin, they are there for our students and citizens of the state. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Tim Jones, could you give us just a brief update on the budget as it sits today, the proposed budget?
Yes, ma'am, I'll be glad to do that. In your folder, there is a stapled package of 3 pages that kind of gives you an update on where the legislature is in terms of their budget development. The first page of that is just some narrative that starts off Senate Higher Education Appropriations Committee. It's white.
Maybe we should have made it red.
That costs more money, ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
We'd have to pass the hat. Thank you.
On Tuesday, the Senate Higher Education Committee met, chaired by Senator Lynn, and she announced overall what the higher education budget would look like. Her committee is meeting today at 4 o'clock and will officially distribute her budget recommendations. But on Tuesday, Senator Lynn indicated that higher education, universities, community colleges, and workforce education would receive about a 5% cut of approximately $185 million. This would be offset by about $168 million in additional lottery revenue and a 6% tuition increase for universities and community colleges. So that would bring the cut down to about a 1.62% range. So that is good news for the system. She also mentioned that there would be no new non-recurring funds available, so issues such as Centers of Excellence or the Major Gift Matching Program would not be able to be funded. She also indicated that the Board General Office would take a 10% reduction. On Tuesday, Representative Pickens, the chair of the House Schools and Learning Council, issued his recommendations. That's the second page of that packet. You can compare his recommendations with the board's original budget. There is a front and back to that. Overall, there's about a 4% cut or $120 million reduction in general revenue. This reduction is offset by about $68 million in additional lottery revenue and a 6% tuition increase. They also partially funded some of the issues the Board of Governors had included in its original budget. They did provide funding for the second-year planning costs for the two new medical schools, although it was at the level of the original plan submitted 2 years ago, not the revised plan submitted last summer and adopted by this board. Also not included in the House's proposal is funding for Centers of Excellence or the Major Gift Matching Program. So the current schedule has both committees developing proposed appropriations bill probably this weekend. It would be going to eventually the floor of the House and Senate the week of April 7th, and then once passed out of each chamber, they would begin conference. So that's a quick update on the budget, ma'am.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much for you do a wonderful job with this, and I know that you work quietly to help us in all these areas. We'll ask the interim task force, FAMU, Governor Pappas.
Thank you. Those of you who have participated on the board are aware that the interim task force involved in the FAMU operational and financial controls issues have been working since about last July. We issued an interim report to the legislature as they had requested on March 1st. I'm not going to rehash all of the history behind the formation of the task force. I think that's well established. What I would like to address very briefly is the nature of the work that we concluded and what I believe those findings tell us and what work remains to be done. You may also know that Governor Parker serves on that task force as well. She may wish to add some comments. And I would like to add that with respect to some of the conclusions that I may state here, they are my own conclusions as an individual member of the task force. I don't purport to represent the opinions of all the members. As far as the action that was taken, we were allocated a $1 million appropriation from the legislature last year to conclude some oversight activities, and the decision that needed to be made was how best to use those funds. In my opinion, after having done some research on similar type of turnaround issues for educational institutions, I think those funds were not adequate to do a comprehensive oversight, but they were what they were, and we were appreciative of having them. And knowing that we had those limited fundings, we focused on what we believed to be a manageable set of actions. Those actions involved isolating issues with regard to the financial and operational environment, engaging a firm with extensive experience in this kind of oversight and management operation, and bring them in to review in great detail the corrective action plan that had been implemented by President Ammons and his administrative team. The nature of that review took on the complexion of what's called a verification and validation process. And in that environment, they were able to assess by reviewing each and every one of the corrective action plans, how it responded both to the issues that were raised in the operational and financial audits, how it was designed, whether that design was likely to be successful, and to what extent that particular framework would have sustainability. In almost all of the areas that were examined with regard to the financial audit and operational audit, with the exception of IT, which I'll bracket for a follow-up discussion, it was concluded that they were trending very positively, and we wound up with a scoring system that gave them about a 93% rating on having actions that were sustainable to achieve the desired objective. Now, I'd like to point out that you have to remember, because this was an extremely focused overview, it was looking at the corrective action plan that was designed to correct actions that were raised as material weaknesses in the financial and operational audit findings. So it was a narrow universe of review, but it was all of the highest risk areas with the exception of IT and contracts and grants, which I'll address momentarily. As a result, I think it's showing a very positive trend line with regard to the capability of the institution to begin the process and to sustain a process of turning around the circumstances that led to the negative results. You'll also know that in the period of the 07 financial audit, they were able to achieve an unqualified opinion, although there were still findings with respect to weaknesses in the process. Before I address the IT and the contracts and grants, I'd like to say, in my view, what this tells us is that they are definitely moving in the right direction, that President Ammons has assembled a very competent team of extremely dedicated individuals that have worked exhaustively to achieve these findings and these results. I would also say, however, that in my opinion, the circumstance is still fragile. They have not had a sufficient amount of time for these to become institutionalized objectives. No one could achieve that in the time frame that they've faced. And so the time will tell, with continued dedication and focus, as to the sustainability of this effort. The challenge they face is that it is very much driven by the success and focus of individuals. And as long as that is the case, if any of that environment changes, there is a potential weakness in that result. So the good news is it's very much moving in the right direction, and we're very pleased and happy to report that. We continue to have work necessary to be done in the IT area. The integration of IT with the other components of financial and operational controls is vital. The PeopleSoft environment we rely heavily on to yield appropriate reporting and results and to allow for adequate reconciliations, all of which have been a weakness in the system. That is improving. We have had enough work done by a CIO group of university system participants, of which we're appreciative for their that they were offered to us to conduct that effort, and the Presidents, we thank you for that. The work that they have done, as well as that we have let a contract to Accretive, who will also go in and do a similar verification and validation process on the corrective actions for IT. That process is to begin shortly. We have yet to let a consulting contract for contracts and grants, but it was our recommendation to the legislature that the remaining funds that had been appropriated to the task force be allocated for the specific purpose of assisting the university with a consultant who can delve into the issues of the contracts and grants control mechanisms. So those two items of work, which are both vital and also high-risk components, are yet to be completed, and we hope to have the report and conclusions of similar success to you by about the 1st of June. So that is the status of the preliminary report. I'd be happy to answer questions, and perhaps Governor Parker may have any words she might like to add.
Governor Parker, before you start, excuse me for, I want to first of all thank you, Governor Pappas, and thank you, Governor Parker, for participating in this task force. I also want to officially thank the Vice Chair, Justice Shaw, Barbara Bowles, Michael Chavez, T. Willard Fair, Bill Jennings, Jolene Merkel, and Ed Pinson. They participated in this task force. They gave their time. There were 12 meetings in less than a year. They reviewed thousands of documents. They worked very hard. All of them dedicated to to putting FAMU on the right path, and I just want to publicly thank you for that. And I want to tell you that I am going to pass the gavel, the remainder of this meeting, to Vice Chair McDivitt in just a moment. I'm going to go over and sit in the gallery for the Senate vote. But I've asked this board to stay here and fulfill their constitutional duty to govern the university system. I thank all of you for your time today, and if you want to report, you can call me later. But thank you very much. And I will call in as soon as I get in the car. I will tell you that I'm on, and I won't be making any more comments, so if I can vote and participate. It's an important business you're doing today, and I thank you very much. But I'll be interested to hear what they say, and I'd like to be, whatever they say about us, I'd like them to say it to me personally. So thank you very much.
About both you and Mark, I think, would like to personally thank you and Mark for your efforts. I think the fact of the message about the importance of higher ed has been conveyed, despite some misgivings about the messenger, meaning the Board of Governors as a whole. But both Mark in particular, some of the criticisms have been very, very personal, and I think he should feel delighted with the numbers that are coming out of the House and Senate, that there's a recognition of the importance of this. And this is not, but for the efforts of you two and the board, wouldn't have happened. I want to thank you both.
Thank you so much, President Delaney, and I want to thank the Chancellor. He has worked through a difficult time with dignity and poise, and I appreciate and thank him very much. And he's like me. No one says anything very nice to us very often. We could just tear right up, couldn't we, Chancellor? Thank you very much, and with that, I'll ask Vice Chairman McDivitt to continue. Excuse me for that.
Thank you. Governor Parker.
Yes, I'd just like to echo some of the remarks of the chair, and that I'd like for the Board of Governors to feel comfortable with the thoughtful participation of the members of the task force. They really, I guess, were really dedicated, spent a lot of time on conference calls, reviewing documents. You can feel comfortable that the information that was provided was thoughtfully reviewed, and that the report that was actually generated was one that everybody paged through page by page, and really wanted to ensure that we were providing the legislature and the Board of Governors with correct information about the status of the university. I agree with Governor Pappas in that I would compliment President Ammons because he pulled together the kind of team that could come in there and really make a difference quickly. It was apparent that the team he pulled together was one that had some experience in this area, and they were able to come in and make just amazing steps in a very short period of time. The success of the strides that they have made really depend upon our support of them and his ability to keep that team together and implement the procedures and policies that they put in place. My only concern, I guess, and I'd like to also be clear to the board that what we did was we actually did an analysis of what they put in place. We did not choose to go back and delve into what may have happened prior to Dr. Ammons actually coming in. What we did was we actually assessed the procedures and policies that he put in place to move forward. We feel comfortable that he's put together the infrastructure that if it stays in its current, if it stays in its current state, if it follows the procedures and policies that they put in place, that the university will come out just fine. However, my only caution is that there are two areas that we were not able to finish. We did a lot in a short period of time, but there are two areas that are very important that remain open, and that's IT and the contracts and grants. I understand that you all wanted us to be done by March. However, it's going to take until the end of June to actually go in and actually feel comfortable that these areas have been effectively vetted. As we all know, IT and contracts and grants are integral to the success of a university, and it's important that we can make sure that we use these remaining dollars to go in and ensure that proper procedures and policies have been put in place to ensure that these final pieces are going to work appropriately. So I certainly encourage our Inspector General to work with the Creative and to work with the university to make sure that we can come back and report to the legislature and to the Board of Governors that we have in fact made sure that these last two areas that are so important have in fact been vetted and proper procedures and policies have been put in place. And also I encourage the university, although I know that it has a lot of things going on and a lot of different folks asking them for a lot of different things, that they would continue to work with the Board of Governors and a Creative to ensure that these last two areas are taken care of, that would be a great use of their time and their energy, so we all can feel comfortable there on the proper footing to go forward. So thank you, Mr. Harper, for all the time you put into this, and thank you for your leadership on this, Governor Pappas, because it was not an easy task to make this happen in such a very short period of time. Thank you, Governor McDonough.
Yes. Governor Pappas, do we need to accept this report?
It's an interim report. I think the final report you'll probably take a formal acceptance of, so this is just really for information.
All right. Well, on behalf of the rest of the board, I thank all of you who served on this task force, including everyone who supported it, and most importantly, to the FAMU administration, President Ammons, and the board of trustees for cooperating and working so hard to move ahead as it's been described. The next item on our agenda is the presentation of the medical education status report. You will recall that when we approved the FIU and UCF medical schools a year or so ago, that we did include a number of things in the resolution, and that it contemplates having updates on all of those things, as well as the general status of our medical education at all of the institutions. Dr. Lamont.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just took a phone call, and our presenters were delayed. They're about 5 minutes away, so if could beg your indulgence and go to the next item.
Maybe we can go on to the next item and come back to you. With that in mind, we're going to talk about the presentation. We're going to have a presentation on e-learning from some of our staff and others. This is part of our Forward by Design activities, and so I'd like to recognize Richard Stevens from the Board of Governors staff to introduce this presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me put my presentation here. What I'd like to cover today is basically a quick overview of distance learning, or e-learning as we kind of prefer to call it in the state university system. And behind tab 6 in your agenda, you will find an overview of distance learning and e-learning that kind of gives you some baseline data and some trend growth data for e-learning in the university system. And one of the reasons for wanting to bring this forward today, other than just for information purposes, is that within the Forward by Design project initiatives, there's a project that deals specifically with distance learning and trying to utilize the instructional technologies to increase baccalaureate production and to increase collaboration for undergraduate programs, especially to increase the number of baccalaureate degrees awarded, and to try to find opportunities for collaboration among the universities in targeted areas. And I think that the e-learning has a real potential to accomplish that if you look at it from a strategic point of view, because it does have the potential for increasing access to baccalaureate education and education in general. And we already have in place within the university system a couple of instances of collaborative degree programs where courses are actually taken from different universities, and a student may enroll at one and then actually receive their degree from that, but will be matriculating through courses at the different universities. And the other thing that e-learning really provides for the state is really greater access to, high-end instructional resources. And it's also an opportunity to share resources and realize some efficiencies, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. So one thing I wanted to point out right off the bat here is that one of the real importances that we see for e-learning in the state university system is the fact that it really is an opportunity for students coming into the system to develop 21st century skills, the types of skills that they're going to need when they go into the marketplace and they're working in a global economic environment, in businesses and in government and even in education at the K-12 level. And what this does is it makes sure, it helps to improve their technology literacy. It really is an opportunity to perfect some of their internet research skills, but more importantly, the online communication, online collaboration that takes place in many of your distance learning courses. It provides them with the skills that they'll carry right on into the workplace. And it also prepares them to be lifelong learners, either on their own or to seek out opportunities that are offered online from other locations. And the other thing that we need to really keep in mind, that when you talk about e-learning or distance learning, whichever way you want to call it, that it's not about a course in a can. It's not about a course you can keep just adding people to indefinitely. It's still about students and an instructor and the interaction between those students and an instructor. The difference is that when you look at a course that's been developed, especially for online delivery, that you have a series of other individuals and components that go into that course, and those include mentors. If the course is spread out over a larger area, there might be an opportunity to hire mentors to deal with students or smaller groups of students. And some of our universities use this very effectively to expand the number of students they can take into a course. You usually have an instructional design team that helps with the faculty member to develop the content and the delivery mechanism. And then you have, of course, all the course management software and hardware and the support that goes along with that. And much of this has to be in place 24/7. In your packet, within the distance learning brief, you'll see some enrollment data that goes back to when we first started collecting it in 1998. And you can really see that the growth trend that has occurred in e-learning across the university system. But I want to just point out 2 or 3 highlights about that data. And this is from the 2006 and 2007 enrollment summary that we did. And you'll look and see that 152,000 plus students, non-duplicated headcount, took at least one distance course, or one distance learning course. And that represents roughly 52% of the state university system headcount for fall 2006. It's a significant increase over the previous year. And if you look back to 1997-98 data, you'll see that it's a really, almost a 300% increase over the number of students who were taking distance learning at that time. And importantly also, that when we looked at the data, we found 17,514 students who were taking only distance learning courses. That means that all they enrolled in was distance ed courses. And that's also a 9% increase over the former year. And if you subtract the 3,300 something students who did not appear to be degree seeking from that group, you're left with the roughly the equivalent number of students that you have enrolled at UNF. So you're roughly looking at a medium-sized university who are pursuing their studies through distance learning in the state university system. Another group of students that we do track is we're showing 50,000 plus students who are enrolled in tech-mediated courses. And when you think about e-learning, it's not just about the courses that can be completed totally at a distance, but there's actually a continuum. If you think of a course as being from beginning to end, that a portion of that course may be through e-learning and a portion of it in the classroom, and another portion of it might be through some other mechanism. So we're looking at the text-mediated courses as being those courses that are commonly referred to as blended or hybrid, and where a student would actually sit in the classroom and have the classroom interaction for a portion of their course, and then also be engaged in instructional activities online. And we're talking instructional activities, not just the posting of syllabi and assignments on a website. If you take a look at some of the characteristics that you see for your e-learning students in the state university system, you'll see that at least 90% of them usually are traditional on-campus degree-seeking students. This number has held from the beginning when we first started collecting data. It hovers around 89 to 91%. So it's roughly 90% that has been the mark that we have seen in the state university system. And this compares somewhat to the national data that we've seen that shows anywhere from 75 to 80% of all students enrolled in a distance education course is also enrolled in on-campus courses. What we do see, though, is that for a number of the students who are seeking or who are taking only distance learning courses, you see a lot of adult first-time degree-seeking students who otherwise wouldn't be able to attend college, and a lot of professional students, working professionals, who are seeking a master's degree or seeking certification in a certain area. And this is a very much a very convenient, just-in-time learning mechanism for them to pursue those studies. We also see a fair number of non-degree seeking students, and this can be for a number of different reasons. We kind of play with the data sometimes when we look at it, and I know that this last round of data, the oldest distance learning student was 91 years old, and then we had two 16-year-olds who were also enrolled in distance learning courses. So it runs a real wide gamut of the age range, and it's interesting to see how many people who are over 70 who are actually taking these courses for personal enrichment or even pursuing a degree. The demographic mix that we've tracked for the state university system is very closely followed that mix that you see in general enrollment, and that's understandable when you think that 90% of them are actually on-campus students. What we have seen in this last data was a shift a little bit away from that base, and with a few more women students and a few more white students showing up in the demographic mix, and we're not real sure why that is, or if it's just a one-time thing, because traditionally, when we've been looking at this data, it has tracked very closely to the mix of the university system in general. With regards to the number of offerings in the state university system, we really compare very favorably to other states. And in fact, when you look at the data that's provided by the SREB on their website, that Florida ranks at the top of four-year institutions in Florida, public, meaning the state university systems, ranks at the top in the total number of student FTE and among the 16 SREB states. And with regard to undergraduate FTE, they also rank at the top. Yeah. And so basically we're providing more courses and serving more students than the other states in the SREB region. What we have is this last year, we had over 20,000 individual course sections that were offered through e-learning, and 7,900 of those were really tech-mediated courses or hybrid courses, the ones I talked about earlier that were part classroom and part instructional technology. We are looking at this time having 36 baccalaureate programs with 32 of them that you can fully complete at a distance without having to go to campus. And this has been a significant area of growth in the past 3 or 4 years for the state university system. The early growth that we saw in online offerings and distance learning were pretty much in the master's area and graduate education. And to reflect that, you see that we do have a large number of graduate programs with 84 of them fully at a distance. Most of these are master's degree level programs. We do have some doctorate level programs that are focused pretty much on the professional, working professionals like the pharmacists who became pharmacists underneath the old rule where you only had to have a baccalaureate degree. Many of them are finding that they need to have the PharmD now to be competitive, and so University of Florida has been very successful in putting that program out and getting the credentials of those people and up to the standard that is coming out of the colleges today. And another area of very significant growth is the certificate programs. What you see with the certificate programs are typically 12 to 18 credit hour mini programs. They're usually part of an existing degree program, but they are tailored to very specific either technology enhancement areas or to very specific professional development areas. And we have seen a very significant growth in the past 2 years in the number of certificate programs that are being offered by our institutions, and these are really targeting your working professionals. But the one thing that I do want to point out is that when you look at the program list that is also provided in your package, that you're not talking about, in most cases, you're not talking about programs that stand fully alone with just their own faculty, their own support, and their own students. What you're really looking at is programs that exist at a university that have enough courses to where you could actually complete that program at a distance if you wanted to. Yeah, or you can take one, you can take some courses on campus and some off. So the distance learning or e-learning is really fully integrated with the on-campus program. They're not two different programs at that particular campus. So if you see a business degree at FIU, that business degree exists on campus just as well, and it's typically the same faculty. It's typically the same support services that would be offered to the on-campus students. It's just available to those who also need to take it through e-learning. We have had some programs, though, that were developed from the beginning to be nothing but distance education, and one good example of that, again, is the fire science program that was developed by the University of Florida that is offered out to the firefighters and the fire chiefs throughout the state. In going forward with the project that has been initiated under Forward by Design, we do look at what we have in existence, and we see that we have a lot of existing resources for e-learning and that can be strategically important to us. And one of these, of course, is a statewide articulation agreement that allows for community colleges and students and university students to move fairly freely between the institutions. And another one is a state common course numbering system, which is a real strength that Florida has, where the courses at one university are going to be able to transfer over to another institution. We've also, over the years, built out a very robust online library resources through both the efforts of the Florida Center for Library Automation, and also the libraries themselves, that you can really get into our libraries now online, pretty much 24/7, and find the resources you need to do your research and your studies and to work on your projects. And, as I pointed out that a little earlier, the Florida university system really ranks very high in the SREB states, right at the top with the number of students and programs. And what that means is we have significant expertise in the state university system, and that is evident in the number of students and the quality of the programs and some of the awards that have been received by the universities. But what we do see is that it's not evenly distributed among the institutions, that some, have a lot more resources in place. And there has been a continued emphasis on graduate programs because that's where a lot of the demand has been. And there is, still limited collaboration between the institutions with regard to course sharing or faculty resource sharing and the development of collaborative programs. And then the other thing that we would see if we look more closely is that some of the universities have really placed priorities on e-learning for different reasons, that, as part of their university mission and strategy, they all kind of look at it from a different perspective. But we do have an opportunity, I think, going forward to address some of the weaknesses that we might find and to capitalize on the strengths that we have. And one of the key ways that I think we can do that is through the Florida Distance Learning Consortium, which has been in place for a number of years. And the consortium is a membership organization that all of our universities belong to by basically default, because the consortium is supported financially in part by the state university system. And the membership includes the community colleges and state universities, and it's an opportunity for the administrators at the different institutions to get together to share their concerns, to work towards gaining resources they need. And if we were to kind of use that a little bit more strategically, it would also could become a very good vehicle for going forward with some collaborative efforts and course sharing and degree development. And Madam Chair, if you want to take questions now, or would you like to move on to Dr. Hopper?
Well, I'd like to ask you some questions, and I don't know if the rest of the board would, but I guess because some of these numbers are very astonishing to me, but particularly focus on the second to the last slide. I'm curious, and maybe some of the presidents can chime in, or whoever is appropriate. Where you have 36 baccalaureate programs, which seemingly most of them are fully distanced. Two things: how is it determined which baccalaureate degrees to offer in that fashion? And secondly, is there any difference in the admission standards?
Well, I'll take a shot at that, and then I would ask some of our universities to chime in with that, if they have those particular programs. There's no difference in the admission standards. Basically there's no difference between our online degrees or distance learning degrees and the on-campus degrees in regard to the admission standards, grading, or anything else.
So in other words, you have to have the same metrics as a freshman and so on and so forth.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And most of these programs really are at the baccalaureate level are targeting people who are looking at, most of them are at the upper division level. So the student would probably have matriculated somewhere, either at university, to their lower division courses before coming into that major.
So they're not fully online.
Well, we actually have the ability to do a full 4-year program online. Both, some of our universities have built that out, but the community college system has built out online AA degrees, and you can transfer over into our program.
Okay, but let me try to understand that. When you say there's 36 baccalaureate programs and 32 are fully distance, are all or a vast majority of those 2-year, the last 2 years?
More than likely, you're going to see a large number of those are going to be the last 2 years. For example, the RN to BSN, the nursing programs, are the last 2 years because they're designed to as a capstone for the practicing RNs who receive the associate science degree. And they're designed primarily to serve their local constituency and practicing nurses. Some of them, though, are programs that you could matriculate through from the get-go.
President Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As one of the institutions heavily invested in online education, let me tell you a little bit about how we make some of those decisions. A primary target audience for our online programs is the military, and so we've engaged in some very significant conversations with them. And some of our online programs were, in fact, developed specifically for military students. Obviously, when they're deployed around the world, they need a way to maintain connection and things of that sort. So that's one of the, you asked the question, how do we make these decisions? One is we develop programs specifically for the military. The second is given the rural nature of the Panhandle region, it's a way to bring education to people who may not be able to get to either a branch campus or a main campus or what have you. So again, we look at needs assessments and enrollment patterns, and in conversation with community colleges and so on. So we make some strategic decisions that way. And a third area that has begun to emerge is looking around for additional partners. So, for example, on the military, back to the military again, we have partnered up with Florida Community College of Jacksonville to do quite a number of degree completion programs, again, for the military. So a lot of it is very, very strategic in our case, looking at very specific populations and looking for those kinds of solutions.
Okay. Have you looked at this handout, President Cat? Is this accurate in terms of the nature of the degrees that you give that way?
I would say yes. And again, if the program was not our marine sciences program, for example, was developed specifically for the Navy. There are others that are sort of hybrids that where the conversation started with the military, and then we also saw a market in the rural part of the Panhandle, for example. And also, we do have those contracts in conjunction with FCCJ. We've partnered up with other community colleges around the country in Navy towns. So a big part, between 33 and 35% of our whole student body is military connected. So that's been a big driver for us in this particular area. And it enables us to maintain that connection with that student no matter where they are deployed.
And so you would have a large percentage of yours that could be from freshmen.
I wouldn't say a large percentage. I would say probably, maybe relative to other institutions, a bit higher. We've focused predominantly on the last 2 years because of the degree completion issues and students transferring in with associate's degrees. But it is possible at UWF to do a whole 4-year degree online. We have enough basic studies courses available for individuals that want to make that choice. But again, we focus on the last 2 years.
Okay. Governor Parker. Pardon?
I'll wait until he gets to the next.
Okay. Does anybody else have any comment or question? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, this time what I'd like to do is, because I did kind of give a lead into the Florida Distance Learning Consortium, we've invited Dr. John Opper, who is Executive Director of the consortium, to come and speak with us and to give you kind of a quick overview of what the consortium is engaged with and some of his ideas for collaboration and sharing. And let me see if I can find his real quick to help him out here. Dr. Opper.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today briefly. The consortium has been around in one form or another since about 1996, 97. In 2003, we created the consortium currently in its present form by combining the old Florida Community College Distance Learning Consortium and the Florida Virtual Campus in an effort to support our sort of K-20 focus that we were moving towards. The consortium is a voluntary organization. Our institutions participate because we hope we provide a value-added service to them. We think we've got this model right in the sense that other states over time, and you may have read about them, have established freestanding, degree-granting virtual institutions. We don't think that that's the right approach. We think our institutions are there to grant degrees. They're accredited to do that, and our role is to support them in that activity. So that's what we have done. The consortium works in about these 6 particular areas, 2 of which I'll focus on briefly in a minute. But we do try to buy things together to leverage our buying power and make it more cost-effective. We support each other in testing and mentoring our students around the state. We do webinars for faculty who are interested in teaching online, and we build partnership with publishers and providers of services that we're interested in procuring. All of those things our institutions participate in as they would like to. We operate a web catalog of courses, so students can come to our catalog and search for courses on any way, delivery method, by common course number, by institution. They can do a number of searches. In 2005, 2006, we had 6,000 courses listed in the catalog. Last year we had 12,800, and this year we have 11,000 so far without summer. So we're probably looking at 15 or 16,000 by the end of this year. And currently we have 9 state universities who are listing courses in the catalog. 2 2 years ago, we had a degree listing because we didn't have enough degrees to really do a database. Now we have 313 online degree programs available to students. And that ranges from the certificate program at a community college level to doctoral programs. This is just a screenshot of the catalog, and you can visit it at any point. It's www.distancelearn.org. We also operate a content repository. We noticed about 5 years ago that NCS had done a study, and a lot of our institutions, 57% of our institutions nationally, all institutions had said that one of the biggest barriers to the spread of distance learning was the cost of content, high-quality content for use in these courses. So our institutions got together and said, we can share content amongst each other and cut the cost of these course development opportunities. And so what we've developed is an online repository of course objects. So faculty can come here and search for instructional resources that meet their needs as they build out their courses. So looking forward just a little bit, as we have our e-learning systems have matured and gotten more sophisticated, we have some opportunities, I think, and these are some of the conversations the consortium members are having now. It's become apparent to all of our institutions that we can't offer all the courses that student needs all the time. And so a lot of times students are willing to move around. While they'll stay close to their home institution most of the time, they might want to get that 1 or 2 degree courses they need to complete their degree program. We're starting to see some responses on student surveys that say that getting degrees from other institutions in a timely way has helped them move toward their degree faster. We think that's a good goal to have. One of the other issues that's come particularly from a lot of our adult students is they would like to be admitted or have a quick admit system where they could go and move into an institution, take an online program faster. Sort of the problem we face is what's happened to us with Amazon and the other online retailers. You can do almost anything online, and our students kind of want to do that with us now. The third bullet on this slide talks about our Orange Grove repository. We currently have about 689 resource items in there from Florida alone, but we've linked out to the Library of Congress, Merlot, the University System of Georgia. We're linking out eventually to several other university systems, and we have currently 85,000 external resources available to faculty for building their courses, and we think that will continue to increase. And the last item talks about degree completion. We've done some work with the SREB and looking at some other states, and we've determined that students make progress toward their degree, and then life happens to them. They get married, they have a job change, they need to go to work, whatever reason. There are a large number of students out in Florida who have maybe 3 years towards a bachelor's degree and they haven't finished. So we think that we can use these systems that deliver instruction to them in a flexible way on their terms to recover or rescue those students and help them to complete their bachelor's degree. These projects are underway in Louisiana and Ohio, and SREB is interested in working with us here in Florida to see if there are some ways that we can't do that here as well. So that's kind of a quick overview, but I'll be happy to react to any questions you have.
Yes, Governor Pappas.
If you can answer this, but since you have the breadth of all the institutions under this umbrella, I don't know if you've heard our discussion about enrollment growth or are aware of the issues that we face in that arena, but it's a challenge in terms of meeting the demands of the projected student population in any event. To what extent is it realistic to assume that this distance learning can be an adequate substitute for actual physical enrollment growth at the institutions? I mean, is it robust enough to begin to make sense, or is that just not a reality? Or
I think it is a part of a solution. We still have problems with this. We want to make sure the quality is there. As you scale these programs out, you still have to have faculty to teach them. You still have to have mentors to support the students. So it is possible to handle some additional students in these environments and still maintain the quality. And our institutions are looking at that now in terms of the structure of the instructional model for that. But teaching online, a faculty member teaching online is not easy, and not every faculty member can do this. And one of the first things that happens to usually a faculty member who teaches online for the first time is they realize that they're never off. Students send email all the time, and they want an answer. And so I think that e-learning can provide a part of the solution to these demands that we have. We certainly are seeing students hit our catalog pretty hard. A year ago, course search was the big issue on our catalog, but now the degree database is searched almost as heavily as the course search is. And so we think students are looking really hard at options from our institutions to complete their degree and looking for this information.
Governor Parker.
How is it that students know about you? I mean, how do I know to go here if I were a student?
It's a valid question. We have not had the large marketing budget to market the catalog as much as we have, but if you go to Google or almost any of the search engine, you type in distance learning in Florida, we're going to show up. I mean, a long time ago when we bought distancelearn.org as a URL on the web, it's probably the best investment we ever made. And so we show up pretty heavily in all the rotation on all the search engines. But a little marketing would help this drastically. But right now our institutions can fill every section of every course they offer in distance learning probably first and fast. That's the way it tends to work. Students love this flexibility and they're gravitating towards it.
Do you know offhand, or maybe Richard or someone else in the audience, how many degrees are granted annually through distance learning through our system?
I don't think I know that statistic, or if we keep that.
Well, actually, that goes back to one of the comments I made earlier, that these degrees are, distance learning is fully integrated with the degree programs. The degree completion information that we do collect does not differentiate between whether that student was a distance learning student or an on-campus student. And so for that reason, we really don't know how many people complete their full degrees through distance education.
Well, you might want to try tracking it that way. I mean, last year there was an article in one of the local papers in my area that focused on an individual who lived on one of the islands down in Central Florida who had obtained a full degree from the University of Florida, and I really was unaware of it, so I called the young man and found out about it, and I was kind of surprised. But I think it is an important thing to track, because if we are going to eventually have the money to market this, and it is another way to provide access if you can maintain quality, you want to be able to show that successful people obtain their degrees in that fashion.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I'll work with our data people on that.
President Kavanaugh probably keeps those numbers, don't you?
Successful grads.
Well, I mean, you keep your graduates, don't you, by, you can track who got online degrees versus, yeah. Okay.
But an online degree is actually not all that common, because there are only limited online degrees, and a lot of other students who want to take certain majors cannot do online degrees. So you've got to be very selective in the online degree that you're doing. But I want to emphasize that these are fully integrated into programs. They're a different way of gaining access. The programs have focused on to online learning in order to provide access to students so that they can, in fact, finish their degrees when they're in Iraq or when they're somewhere else. A lot of the general education programs are all online, but there is a cap that you get at in terms of the online program. It's not a panacea. You actually would end up needing more faculty to teach the online programs than you do to do your face-to-face programs, because you can only teach so many courses in an online content form, because you are on 24/7 in terms of all of the emails that come through.
Any other comments or questions? President Medee.
We have 35,000 instances of course registration online. It's up about 100 times from a few years ago. Yet I would tell you that
we probably had, I don't have the number, but a few dozen people at the most that get their degrees completely online. We don't even encourage that because we think some contact with the campus, some contact with a professor is helpful for the student's development. So what we watch is how many are registering for online courses. Typical online student may take half of his or her courses online.
Right, but life does change.
Yes.
I mean, I'm the online queen. I know a lot about this because of another volunteer activity in which I participate in, and President Kavanaugh is familiar with that institution also because it does a lot of military work. And it is possible to do very large numbers of online degrees, maintain quality, have full degree programs, but you can't have every program, obviously. But if you're selective, that's why I'm asking these questions, because eventually that might be something that we determine is a way to increase access in an effective, cost-effective manner. I mean, I'm not encouraging it. I just think we need to keep an open mind.
I just have one more question. Did I hear you say that all of the courses that are offered online are all full? So am I understanding that we are, fully utilizing what you have in place, and that, there are no, courses that are offered that are, not full?
Yeah, I would say to you that it's a common conversation when the consortium meets. It meets quarterly around the state that these sections of these courses that every college and university offers, the minute they open them up, they start filling very quickly, and they fill before almost any other option. So they're very popular.
So then there's room for, growth in this regard?
Sure, there's room for growth. It's just still a question of finding faculty and the resources to offer more sections. But yes, there is room for growth.
Governor Martin.
The advising of the students, do you have a special section of advisors in your online area, or do you have the regular advisors in the regular programs?
I would say both. Most of our institutions have pretty good advising systems, and they have special advisors in place for these students in most cases. It's one of the cost factors we have to deal with as these students gravitate more and more to this type of instruction. They have to be careful that e-learning is right for them, and that they've covered all the bases in terms of integrating us with their regular program. But our institutions are doing a good job with their students in this regard.
Thank you.
Governor Pappas.
Maybe this work's been done, but it seems to me that, for us anyway, we would have to have a better understanding of what do these economics look like, because from what I'm hearing, and it makes sense to me, that the faculty demands for this kind of teaching has to be pretty extraordinary. And so it's easy, I'm sitting here thinking, cost effective, but it may be that it's actually considerably more expensive outside of the bricks and mortar. I don't know. And the issue would be looking at, are there ways to do it that make it more cost effective? Are we doing it in ways that are cost effective, or are we doing it in ways that are actually more expensive, just so we know what the benchmark is? Because it's one thing to delve into distance learning to meet the needs of the students and their changing directions, but if it's raising our costs, and I'm not saying that that's a reason not to do it, but it's information we need to have. And I have no sense of what that picture looks like.
Well, I think that's the reason we have this focus now, because they've just begun their work. It's part of the Forward by Design, and I think there's a lot more work to be done. And if you'll recall, one of the suggestions in the Pappas report was to have an e-college or something like that, where you had one that focused on the whole system. I'm not suggesting that's the right thing to do, but that's part of what a look needs to be and to see, because depending upon, from what I've learned over the last 10 years in the other school that I work with, it all depends on how you put it together and what your emphasis is as to how cost effective you can make it. But if you're doing it as an integrated venture and you only have this program here, or most of it is kids taking particular courses, it's a very different approach to the program. Yes.
Two comments. The first is that not all faculty can do e-learning, and that in a lot of our institutions, we have training programs in place. And in fact, they're enforced, so the faculty must take an entire semester to learn how to effectively do e-learning. The second is, if you're looking for cost efficiency, the hybrid courses are the most cost-efficient programs in here, because in effect you're getting into reduced seat time, so you can use the same classroom twice in the same week rather than only once.
Okay. If there are no more questions of our speakers, they do have a lot more work to do, so we'll be hearing more of this over the next, I would say, matter of years, not just months. So we have a lot to learn in this area, and I appreciate the presentation and the good comments. Thank you. We're going to go back now to the item 5 on your agenda, the presentation on medical education status, and Dr. Lamont. Your people are here, right? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just ask you to take a few minutes, 5 or 10 minutes, to provide some attention to some students who have come and colleagues who have come a long way at higher speeds than I would have liked, but they all made it here this morning. I'd like to introduce Dr. Juan Sandon from the University of Florida, Medical Director of the Harrell Center. Carla Hicks is a fourth-year medical student at the University of Florida. Sarah Sheridan, who is the Director of a Clinical Learning Center at Florida State University. Her counterpart at the University of South Florida, Don Schocken. And Dorothy Killeran, who is a trained standardized patient. And last but not least, Mr. Peter Chang, who is a fourth-year medical student at the University of South Florida. Madam Chair, if you recall, last year we were directed to go back to our medical school deans of all of our schools, the new ones and the existing schools, to determine if we could find some efficiencies, ways to save money that we hadn't thought of before. We pulled the deans together on 2 meetings, a preliminary meeting and then a deeper meeting, and we sorted through a number of possibilities and came to 2 very viable conclusions for some consortia and sharing in the state university system, a group of medical educators. First, we agreed that there would be some potential savings to do something in the area of library resources. We have very strong infrastructure, as you know, with our Florida Center for Library Automation. Building off of that, we determined that there was more that we could do with, particularly with bringing the new medical schools online. The determination there was to wait until we got all of the staff on board at the new schools who would be pertinent to that conversation, and then we would re-engage on that topic. The other area that was of interest, and the reason that we have these ladies and gentlemen in front of you, is in the area of what are called standardized patients. Standardized patients are individuals who are trained to demonstrate maladies to medical students, and that training is almost a kind of a guild. There is nowhere that you can go to get a degree in it. The training really is passed on from one person to another. What we've determined is that in the state university system we have a very, very cordial group of people who are so engaged at our schools at USF and UF and FSU. And they agreed that while they were not willing to share, or could not be willing really to share their standardized patients because they're in such high demand, what they would be able to do would be to train up the trainers for the new schools at Florida International University and the University of Central Florida. And in the process of having that conversation, they also determined that there was some more collaboration that they could do. I'm going to turn the podium over to Sarah. We're going to have a short a very brief demonstration of the way standardized patients work with medical school students. The students, or the actors, if you will, who are going to take part are going to join you at a table so that we can mic them. And I would ask that they take the chairs right there that are associated with Dr. Weatherall. You don't mind moving, do you, for one of your medical school students? And Sarah, I'll turn it over to you for a brief demonstration. Thank you.
I'm going to give, as I explained to you the scenario here that you'll be seeing, I'm going to give you a minute to get into that headset. Standardized patients really a technology, an educational technology, and we're really excited about a new consortium and sharing of information. We've already started that this morning. It's remarkable what you can get from your community. We try to get patients who are able to do whatever we want so that we can provide medical students with a consistent curriculum in medical education. The scenario that you're going to be seeing, and after you see it, we'll be here to answer questions. We have students and a medical director as well. The scenario that you'll be seeing is in the doctor's office. The patient is Dottie Johnson, age 62, who is in for her annual GYN visit. Last week she had a mammogram and lab work and is coming in to find out the results. However, yesterday when they called to confirm her appointment, she asked about the mammogram because they had asked her to stick around when they did it, and then they took her back in and did some more. And the receptionist said, "Hold on, I'll get back with you," and came back and said, "The doctor will talk to you tomorrow." So that is the scenario that Pete and Dottie find themselves in right now.
Hello, Mrs. Johnson. How are you?
Members, if you cannot hear, we'll try to mic them up even better.
Hello, Mrs. Johnson. How are you today? My name is Peter Chang, and I'm a fourth-year medical student at the University of South Florida.
How do you do? I'm happy to meet you.
Okay, great. So, from what I hear, we're just here on a follow-up of your laboratory results
Yes.
and so forth.
Yes, and from my usual exam.
Okay, and you're curious about what the results of your tests were?
Oh, I certainly am. I was distressed yesterday when I could not get any information about this. So you can imagine, I'm quite nervous about it.
Oh, okay. It's very understandable. I know it's kind of a stressful time anytime you get any results back. So we did some lab work, and everything kind of turned okay with that, and everything looks good as far as all of your numbers are concerned. And you recently had the mammogram also.
Yes.
And you've been keeping up with your yearly mammograms, which is great.
Oh, yes, every year I have a mammogram, and the results have always been normal.
Okay, good. On this mammogram, they did find something in the upper right side of your right breast that was a little suspicious as far as it showing up on a mammogram. And, we're going to need to take some steps now to kind of see what that mass is actually made up of. And
Well, that comes as a big shock to me. It really does. I mean, in light of the fact that I have these mammograms every year and the results have been normal, I'm wondering if this could be a mistake. I mean, you hear about mistakes all the time.
yeah, there are mistakes, and we can always repeat the mammogram to double check and see if it's there, or we can actually do an ultrasound of that spot and see if there's anything that needs to be done further. Okay?
And does the ultrasound indicate whether this spot is malignant?
Well, it doesn't necessarily do that 100%. What we need to do is take a small needle and actually get a little piece of sample of that tissue so we can send it off to a lab and find out exactly what it is.
Well, my question would be, if you had to do that, or you had to do something invasive, would that in any way possibly enable this to spread further than it already has, if it turns out that it is malignant?
That's a really great question. Usually the doctors that do the procedures, that take the sample, it's very precise, and there's a very small, if not
zero chance of anything spreading from that site. If it even is something, and we're not saying that it is or it isn't, at this point in the game, we're just trying to figure out and trying to characterize what that mass is.
I see. How quickly could we proceed with that?
Oh, as quickly as you'd like, as quickly as we can schedule an appointment with...
I would want to do it as soon as we could.
Okay, very understandable. Okay. All right.
Well,
and,
go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, go ahead.
I'm just very nervous about this and worried.
Okay, and it's understandable, and, people react to this type of news in so many different ways, and however you deal with it best is what we'll try and do here for you, and be here to support you in the decisions
Well, I
that you
certainly
make.
appreciate that. I really do.
So just to kind of go over things again, do you want to tell me kind of what you understand about, what's going on in this situation?
Well, I understand that you're saying that the mammogram shows a suspicious area, and that in order to find out more about it, that you would have to do some further testing on it, and that might involve inserting a needle. What is that called?
It's called a biopsy.
A biopsy, to determine exactly what that suspicious spot is.
Okay, great. And, we went over a lot of information in the last couple of minutes.
Yes.
Do you have any questions about anything that might
Oh, you
concern
can imagine there's just a million things going on in my mind on this. It's just like...
Excellent job. Excellent job. Imagine if the first time an intern had to give someone bad news, it was a real patient. And it's just one of the thousands of ways standardized patients can help our med students learn to handle the kind of communication and diagnosing and physical exam challenges that they're faced with. I know.
I just wanted to add that you were busy looking at them, and we were busy looking at you, and you were completely immersed in this situation. Everybody here wanted to know what this biopsy result showed and what this poor woman has to deal with. And the situations are even more intense in a small doctor-type room where these are actually occurring in our medical schools. So it's an environment of suspended disbelief that's completely absorbing to the student. And we can present the range of the normal healthy child that just needs his checkup, to the patient who has bad news that you have to deliver, to somebody who's actually combative with the physician, etc. So it presents a scenario, a situation where we can control what the students see, and we can judge how they react to it. That's really unique in the way of education.
Questions, members?
Very good.
I want to thank the participants once again for taking the trouble to come. These individuals will be available, already working with our new schools at Florida International and the University of Central Florida. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Dr. Lamont, does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry.
Okay, you will be coming back at another time, and, okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody that came and participated. That was a great example of the kinds of things that we're doing. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. We have a number of board regulations that we noticed and reviewed in detail in January, and they are now on our agenda for final approval. Item A on your agenda, new regulation on public meeting requirements, is being deferred until a later time. There seems to be an issue that's cropped up with that one. The next item is the new board regulation on conflicts of interest. Our general counsel presented that at our last meeting. Is there a motion on this particular?
So moved, Madam Chair.
And second, is there any further discussion on this? I presume everybody remembers this particular regulation. We talked about it a good bit at the last meeting. Hearing no discussion, so many is favor the adoption of the regulation, say aye.
Aye.
And oppose, like sign. Okay, all right. Now, from the Facilities Committee, Governor Parker, could you handle this as a group, please?
Sure. I'd like to present to the board as consent items regarding I guess it's the second reading on the rules that we previously had passed through, and so I present this up for a motion at this time, Madam Chair.
I'll move the proposal.
All right, is there any further discussion on the adoption of these regulations? Okay, hearing none, so many is favor their adoption, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, those are adopted. Now we have from the Budget Committee, Governor Perez.
Madam Chair, we discussed each of these regulations fully at our last meeting. They are on second reading. The Budget Committee has recommended their adoption, and I'll move their approval.
Second, any further discussion on these? Hearing none, so many is favor these, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. The next is from the Student Affairs Committee of mine. You'll recall these two regulations having to do with the vaccination for meningitis and the mechanisms we use to accelerate matriculation. We talked about those in a lot of detail. I move their adoption.
Second.
Any objection? Hearing none, show them adopted. The next item on this agenda is the approval of the faculty practice plan for the College of Medicine at UCF. Any discussion? Any objection? Show it approved. Okay, now we're going to move into the reports of committees, and let's begin that by calling on the Facilities and Budget, the Facilities Committee, Governor Parker. Or how are y'all going to do this since you had a joint meeting?
No, we're fine.
Governor Parker and Governor Perez will share the limelight here.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. There are three items that are specifically related to facilities that came out of the joint committee with the Budget and Facilities Committee that I just convened this morning. What I'd like to do is present these three items individually for the board to adopt. The first is that I'd like to move the approval of the 2008-2009 SUS fixed capital outlay legislative budget request as amended.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. So many as favor the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All right.
The second item for the board's consideration that came out of the facilities portion of the joint meeting of the Budget and Facilities Committee is the adoption of a resolution approving the issuance of fixed-rate tax-exempt revenue bonds by the Division of Bond Finance on behalf of Florida Atlantic University in an amount not to exceed $55,300,000 for the purpose of financing the construction of an apartment-style residence hall containing approximately 600 beds on the Boca Raton campus of Florida Atlantic University. I present it as a motion for the board.
Second, any further discussion? Hearing none, so many as favor the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Okay, show it adopted. Next.
Pardon me, Madam Chair. The final item, that I move for the board's consideration is the adoption of a resolution approving the issuance of fixed or variable rate tax-exempt revenue bonds by the Florida Gulf Coast University Financing Corporation in an amount not to exceed $22 million for the purpose of financing a student residence facility on the main campus of Florida Gulf Coast University. I present that as a motion for the body's consideration.
So moved.
Any further discussion? So many in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Okay.
The only comment I'd like to be able to, to add is that I certainly commend the universities for the work they put into giving the board and our staff a comfort level that these bond transactions are in fact steady and good proposals. I know that we ask you for a lot of information, but we think it's important. And the second thing I'd like to say to you is that, when people question some of the value that the university system adds to our state, please keep in mind that when we pass resolutions like this, we're certainly adding to the economy and making a difference, because these are construction opportunities and there are going to be more jobs in our hometown communities. And I just commend the universities for being leaders in the state and providing these opportunities for our economy. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Governor Perez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Budget Committee took up 3 items this morning thus far. I'll make 2 motions and then ask that we defer consideration of one of those items. The initial item was the approval of the 2009-2010 legislative budget request development guidelines. They were presented to the Budget Committee this morning, and we would request a motion as the Budget Committee, a motion to approve the new guidelines.
Is there further discussion? So many in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign.
Madam Chair, the second motion is the approval of the auxiliary facilities that have bond covenants requiring approval for the estimated 2008-2009 operating budgets as discussed and approved by the Budget Committee this morning.
So moved.
Any further discussion? So many in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. All right.
And Madam Chair, the third item, the approval of the amended SUS enrollment plan. After the conversation this morning, the issues surrounding 2+2 articulation and the ability to maintain accessibility, I'm going to ask that we defer this issue until the May meeting so that we can have a little bit more staff study on it and a few more conversations. I was not altogether comfortable with the resolution this morning and would request the indulgence of the board to put this issue off until May.
Does that put us in any position with respect to the existing session?
No, it will do nothing towards this existing session, and it should do nothing to impact the current universities and the presidents with regard to their admissions. I think we have plenty of time to get this done right.
Okay. Do we need a vote on that?
No, as long as everyone is indulgent to the fact that I'm not advancing it from the Budget Committee.
Okay, great. All right, the next is the report from the Student Affairs Committee. I would ask Governor Parker to take the chair, please, for a moment so that I can give my report. From the Student Affairs Committee, we had a joint committee with the Emergency Preparedness and Safety Task Force yesterday, which has been chaired very well by Governor Perez. And we have to bring to the full Board of Governors a series of recommendations. And what I'd like to do is go through a number of them. The first budget request that you just approved from the Budget Committee contained the dollars associated with these requests having to do with additional notification systems, additional police officers, and additional resources and equipment to support those police officers. So bearing in mind, I'm going to review then all of the recommendations, and we can take them up as one. This is a result of a lot of work over the last year following up the Virginia Tech tragedy last April. And we worked we worked immediately, and we were in the process before that, it so happens. But Governor Christ had a task force which worked and made some recommendations very quickly. And so we followed on with those recommendations in Governor Perez's task force, one of which had to do with mental health issues and privacy issues, the legal aspects of privacy as it related to the mental health records of students, and that was referred to the Student Affairs Committee. And so in Governor Perez's task force, he had a variety of work groups. They were as follows and chaired by members of this board. Governor Martin chaired the discussions on emergency notification systems, Governor Parker on campus safety discussions, Governor Chase on faculty and student training to identify at-risk students, And then Governor Marshall, as I said, chaired the discussions on mental health and related issues. Yesterday, we came together as one joint committee, and we made the following recommendations and for the full board to consider. The recommendations contained on pages 7 to 10 of your agenda packets, which outline the needs of the system to ensure that we have sufficient emergency management systems in place. And if you want a snapshot of those, you can take a look on this yellow material. The second one are contained on pages 12 through 18, which outline campus safety needs. The recommendations on page 20, which respond to the need for faculty training to help identify at-risk students. A verbal recommendation was added yesterday with each university needs to provide faculty members with a dedicated emergency number that they can place on their individual cell phones to use as a situation arises. And then with respect to the mental health and related legal issues, they are found on pages 25 through 27. Each of those subcommittees had a section that looked like this, which lay out in bullet point form all of those recommendations. Most everybody here attended those meetings yesterday, so we didn't see any need to go through each one of them. The other part of the mental health that is not contained in there was that we requested that the Board of Governors direct the institutions in writing to address the various funding, to look at the priorities and the funding mechanisms that are available to them and make further recommendations to us as to how we might increase fees, or whether we need a new fee or whatever that may be, to be able to put in place the numbers of counselors and other resources we need to support the student needs. Do I have a motion? I move that the board adopt all of these recommendations as a group.
Second. Any discussion?
I have a brief discussion, Madam Chair. Unfortunately, yesterday when I was chairing the task force committee, I failed to add one additional suggestion from staff that has been developed, and I think it's meaningful, and if you'll bear with me, I'll just read quickly, and it's merely a request and for a recommendation from this board to instruct the staff to help prepare and develop an SUS regulation on emergency management and protocols needed to establish some floors, some minimums across the system, including, at very least, number one, a NIMS template to be used at each university for an emergency management plan. Number two, continuity of operations plans, and that those plans be reviewed biannually. Number three, an all-hazard approach to emergency management to be used in development with appropriate annexes for hurricanes, pandemic flu, other disasters we may face. Number four, functional exercises to occur at least annually. And number five, an annual presentation of the status of the university's emergency management plan to be made to each of the individual universities' boards of trustees. I'd also like the regulation to incorporate recommendations accepted by the Academic and Student Affairs Committee as advanced by our task force. These recommendations you're accepting right now, if those plans would include that. I want to be clear that the regulation we're asking staff to develop, and I would want this board to direct staff to do so, would be simply a floor, not a ceiling or a standard, just a floor to codify minimum protocols that need to be met in order to ensure the safety of our students. And I would ask our staff to work in consultation with the universities, their staffs, and those they've been working with throughout the process to help develop that regulation and get it back to us by May or June as well.
I'll accept that as an amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So first, I guess we'll take a vote on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment as provided by Governor Perez?
Aye.
Aye.
Now, at this time, we'll accept, I think we already have a previous first and second on the original motion. Are you ready for the vote on that? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, it passes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Governor Duncan, and I'm going to turn I'm going to turn it back to you, Governor Parker, because I want to talk on this topic.
Representative Duncan.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. You may recall probably nearly a year ago, OPAGA came out with some points and issues on the research and oversight and efficiencies, and there was statutory legislation that it required our board's greater involvement in the Byrd Center, which sits on the campus of USF. Subsequent to that meeting and that dialogue that we had, the staff of the Board of Governors went and has spent considerable time and effort in trying to understand the dynamics between the Byrd Center, USF, and just the general role that we should or should not be playing in that subject. And Governor McDevitt has been serving on the board of the Byrd Center, and so as soon as I kind of finish this brief overview, I'd like to ask for her comments as well. But as a result of all of those visits and dialogue and considerable time and effort that was spent on behalf of the staff, the Chancellor came out with a letter, which you all received, I believe, as it was sent, but also is included in your package, with recommendations on how to integrate the Byrd Center into USF from both a fiscal and a facility and just general practical approach to a good use of resources on the campus. From that time, then, a few weeks ago in March, the Research and Economic Development Committee met. We had a publicly noticed call on that, had dialogue and discussion on the issue, and our committee has also recommended basically the adoption of the Chancellor's letter and position as a formal position of our board to go on to the legislature as this issue is being considered this session. I think it is important, given our statutory role and direction on this, that we take a position on this issue. I think that the staff has been very thoughtful in the letter that the Chancellor has prepared, and it covers the issues pretty well. And so I would be moving to adopt the Chancellor's position as a formal board position related to the Byrd Center.
Did you describe that?
Everybody's had it in your package, and I think you've been briefed on it, but and I don't know, Chancellor, if you want to cover the highlights, or I can, but the main points are to formally integrate the Byrd Center into the University of South Florida USF Health, allocate appropriate and predictable funding for the USF to operate the Byrd Center, and then to change the current governance structure to allow USF Board of Trustees to determine appropriate administration and governance to include the current statewide mission of the Byrd Center. And I do think that's an important part, that everyone values the great importance of Alzheimer's research and the work that is being done, and that, you know, between the work being done at Florida and others, that there's an important statewide mission to be had on this subject. And by no means are our recommendations diminishing that. We just believe this is a more efficient way to accomplish that goal.
I just want to make a few remarks, because I have been sitting on that board now since early this year, and I've probably attended more meetings of that board than I have of all of the other boards that I sit on combined, and it's been a very intense discussion, because this governance issue has been something that's been bandied about publicly in the local newspapers, and sometimes unfairly, I have to say. And I want to point out that the Byrd Center only just built its building last year and only moved into it last year, and has not even completely been able to integrate some of its operations, because there's been so much uncertainty about the current situation. There is a board of very dedicated people that work on items, and we have wrestled with the appropriate governance for quite some time, ever since I've been on the board, and there have been a number of votes taken on what should be done. And the most recent thing that we've completed was we had a whole day strategic discussion with a facilitator just this past Monday, to try to come to a consensus on what is the most appropriate situation. I have been consistent the entire time that I've been on the board, and I want it to be clear, and we have a representative of the Byrd Center here today if we have any questions. But it's very important for us to realize that given the newness and the controversy surrounding the center, that they have done some outstanding work. They have some very exciting research projects underway, at the institution, and they have as their CEO one of the preeminent national experts in this field, and we should be very happy to have him. He is a endowed chaired professor at the University of South Florida, and has done a lot of work, which he is donating to the Bird Center. He has a lot of intellectual property, which is part of his contribution to the center. And I think we need to realize how important it is that we maintain the visibility and the institute as an entity, so that they can build on not only what they do in the state of Florida, but they do have a national and international reputation in those research circles, and it's important that we maintain that. But I am very strongly in favor, given our financial situation in the state, of integrating it into the University of South Florida. It will certainly allow for elimination of duplicate many systems, and to better leverage all of the sources, and I think it's a two-way street. I think the university will gain from having this facility, just as the facility and the research, just as the Bird Center will gain. So I wanted to point out that a lot of what you read in the paper is not 100% accurate, and that there are a lot of good and dedicated people at the Bird Center, and that they have done a remarkably good job in a very short period of time, and can be helpful and want to continue their statewide mission. And we want the university to understand that that is very important, and that their identity remain intact. And there is a bill, I think everyone knows, that has come out of a Senate committee now that would accomplish that. There are things about the bill that if I had been doing it, I would have done differently, and I think there may still be an opportunity. I'd like for the right people to kind of talk about it, but that's for my Bird Center hat. But I wanted to support this board's position, but I want it clear that I've been clear that that's my position all the time on the Bird Center, because I have a distinct fiduciary duty there as well.
We have a motion on the floor from Governor Duncan. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second it, Madam Chair.
Okay, any more discussion or questions? Governor Stiles? Any more discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Madam Chair, I'm passing the gavel back to you.
And maybe understated in the amount of time and effort she has put on this issue, and I greatly appreciate her involvement and dedication to it, as well as our staff, Dr. Lamont and Bob Donnelly and the Chancellor. I mean, everyone has tried to work very hard to come up with a thoughtful solution to this issue.
Okay, thank you very much. We don't have any further agenda items, but I want to go back to Governor Perez to make sure he wants to be sure that he did in fact include in the LBR.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In an overabundance of caution, I know we passed it out this morning and intended to pass it out this afternoon, but I'm not certain that we actually did amend this year's LBR in our prior motions with regard to the security enhancement. So what I'd like to do is bring to the board, on behalf of the Budget Committee, an amendment to this year's LBR as discussed in the Budget Committee, which provides the addition to this year's LBR of those elements of the budget necessary in order to comply with the Security Task Force, the Emergency Preparedness and Campus Safety Task Force recommendations, that being the $13.8 million for enhancement of notification systems, the $600,000 for 100% FTE emergency managers at 6 universities, the $3.08 million in funding for 61 additional police officers to try to get us to the 1 to 600 standards, and the $560,000 for training and tactical equipment. On behalf of the Budget Committee, I move that amendment to this year's LBR, Madam Chair.
Is there a second? Is there further discussion? So many in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Thank you. Is there any more business to come before the board from the members of the board, or anybody else in the audience have anything they'd like to add? Well, thank you all very much. I want to thank President Wetherill and his staff for the hospitality and the facility and the nice dinner we had last night. And we really do appreciate being here. This is a great room. I love it. It's beautiful. And, of course, I'm a little bit prejudiced because I like the school myself. We do have box lunches available, maybe. Do we? There will be. We're a little bit early, amazingly enough, and if we have nothing more before the board, is there a motion to adjourn? Adjourn.
Congratulations on your